Hello everyone, it's Liz back again today for Module E. In this particular module, we're going to learn a lot about ethics and sustainability and corporate social responsibility. So it's a very current topic. We're going to learn about how the standards of ethical behaviour in business are no different to normal ethical standards. We're going to have a look at what drives ethical business strategies and behaviour, and what's the cost to companies if they don't pursue ethical behaviour. Then we're going to have a look at the concept of corporate social responsibility, and we're going to learn what that's all about and why and how that is good for business. Then we're going to apply those concepts to strategy to see how we can make sure that we've got those things included within our strategy, and how we need to have a strategy supportive organisational structure to make sure that we actually harness all of our resources in the same direction to achieve the same goals. So let's make a start then. And I'd like to start off with a case study again, and we'll be referring to this case study a few times to illustrate the idea of ethical business practice and corporate social responsibility. And the company I'd like to look at is IKEA. IKEA are a global company who sell flat pack homewares. You can walk into their stores, come out with a big box, and then you put all your screws and things in the right place and you finish up with some furniture. They've got 355 stores in 29 countries as at 2017, so a very large global enterprise. Their objective is to offer a wide range of well-designed functional home furnishing products at prices so low that as many people as possible will be able to afford them. They note their vision as being to create better everyday life for many people. IKEA say they have a strong tradition of working with sustainability, another one of their core values. They also say that they do their part by transforming the way we work to become circular and climate positive, and to have a positive social impact wherever we are in the world. So that nicely captures some of the core values and the objectives of IKEA. And we're going to look at those from the perspective of corporate social responsibility and ethics. Most of their operations, most of IKEA's operations, so the management of their stores, the design and the manufacture of their furniture, is run by a trust which is headquartered in Holland, in the Netherlands. Most of the IKEA products are designed in Sweden. That's where the design takes place. Most of the manufacturing has been outsourced to China and other Asian countries. So you can see it has a global spread. And I've put the link there if you want to have a look at more things about IKEA, and that's the link from where I got those facts and those details as well, if you would like to have a look at a bit more. As we discuss our topic on business ethics today, I want you to think about the questions on the following slide in relation to IKEA. IKEA's global supply standard says that they will maintain low costs while fighting the root causes of child labour. What I want you to think about is this. By outsourcing production to China and other Asian countries, are they really fighting the root cause of child labour like they say? Do IKEA's actions indicate that their position on business ethics is actually aligned with the principle of ethical universalism or ethical relativism? And we're going to learn about those two in a little while. And we'll come back to this at the end of this particular section. So when we talk about ethics, what are we talking about? Ethics is about moral principles, not about something being legal or illegal. Okay? Something might be legal, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's ethical. Business ethics deals with the application of general ethical principles to the actions and decisions of businesses and the conduct of their personnel. Okay? So it's not about legal or illegal, but it's about being morally right or morally wrong. There's a couple of sources for ethical standards. We have what's known as the School of Ethical Universalism, we have the School of Ethical Relativism, and we also have integrated social contract theory. And we're going to look at each of those three as we go today. Let's start off by looking at ethical universalism. And what's this all about? What this is as follows. There are common understandings across multiple cultures and countries about what constitutes morally right and morally wrong. Now remember, we're not talking about legally right or legally wrong. We're talking about morally right or morally wrong. So is there common things across multiple cultures and countries that are the same? It gives rise to universal ethical standards that apply to all societies, most societies, nearly all firms and all business people. So the effect on business ethics is that whether a business-related action is ethical or not is judged by universal standards. Now there are many things that are always considered not morally right, not ethically right in many countries. So it's those that we're talking about, okay? Where nearly the whole world has the same idea. When we talk about ethical relativism, what we're talking about is this, where in different cultures and different countries, there are differing beliefs as to what is more ethically right and what is ethically wrong. So in one culture, one thing will be considered ethically okay, morally right. In another culture, it might be considered ethically wrong, morally wrong. And the effect of this on business ethics is that whether a business is acting ethically or not will depend on which particular country or in which culture it's actually situated. And we're going to learn how that actually becomes quite a quandary for some organisations that are operating globally. So let's have a look at some examples of ethical relativism issues. So remember, ethical relativism, where the ethics are different based on customs and beliefs. So there can be differences from one country to another. The use of child labour. In some countries, that's not considered acceptable. For example, in Australia, everybody has to go to school until they're 15 or 16 years old, I think it is, okay? There's no use of child labour. The payment of bribes and kickbacks. Again, that's something that's frowned upon in Australia, but in other countries of the world, it may not be. So relativism can result in multiple sets of standards, different standards in different cultures and different countries. The use of local morality to guide ethical behaviour adds some challenges for global organisations. This, of course, has strategic implications for an organisation, and I'd like you to consider these now. We have this theory which is called integrated social contracts theory. And what this theory says is something along these lines. That if we have first order ethical norms, that's those where they're considered norms across most countries in the world, they should always take precedence over local or what we call second order norms. Okay? So in instances that involve universally applicable ethical norms, there can't be any compromises. We have to always apply these first order ethics above the local ethics when we're trying to work out what is permissible and what is not permissible. Just a little bit more on social contracts theory. According to this integrated social contracts theory, universal ethical principles based on the collective views of multiple societies, they form what we call a social contract. Okay? So all individuals and organisations have a responsibility to observe these social contracts in all situations. Within the boundaries of this social contract, local cultures or groups can specify what additional actions may or may not be ethically permissible, but they can't take away. Okay? So these universal ethical norms always need to take precedence over local norms or local ethics. A local custom is not ethical if it violates any of these universal ethical norms. The application of codes of ethics should first always follow these universal standards with allowance for local ethical diversity and influence, provided they are adding something, not taking something away. As you can appreciate, this creates challenges for companies that are operating on a global scale. Because what's considered acceptable or ethical in the home country may not be considered acceptable or ethical in another international jurisdiction. So if a company is in that position, what should they do? Let's see. We have what's known as the Ethics Code Litmus Test. So where there's areas of ambiguity, we need to ask, is what we are proposing to do fully compliant with our code of ethics? If there's a conflict or a potential problem, then we have to say, is the action in harmony with our core values? If there's some sort of ethically objectionable action, we would need to ask, will our stakeholders, our competitors, or the regulations that we're bound by, such as that Sarbanes-Oxley Act and other legislation, do they find what we want to do ethically objectionable? If the answer is yes, we would need to ask, should we actually do it? Here in Australia, we've had many examples of things that are legal, but some people don't consider ethical. And we have a saying here which says, will it pass the pub test? If it doesn't pass the pub test, the chances are it's not ethical, even if it's local, even if it's legal. And what we mean by passing the pub test, that's just, if you just stopped anybody in the street, a normal person in the street, and said, what do you think about this? If they think it's morally or ethically not right, then it doesn't pass this pub test. So that's really important. So what are some of the consequences for a company if in fact they have an ethically questionable strategy? What might happen to the organisation? There's a few things that could happen if a company fails this ethical litmus test, and the consequences can be quite serious. For example, there might be sizable civil fines and stakeholder lawsuits, and we all know that can be very expensive. Devastating image and public relation hits. If a company does something that's not ethical, doesn't pass the ethical litmus test, well, it can have devastating consequences for the image of the company. There could be sharp stock price drops because investors lose confidence in you as a company. And then finally, and most seriously of all, there could be some criminal indictments and convictions. And again, here in Australia, we've just had a really good example of this ethical or not ethical in the Banking Royal Commission. There's many things that the banks were doing that the Royal Commission said were certainly not ethical. There are some things which could very well lead to criminal charges, that could be, but the majority of things were just plain out ethically wrong. They did not pass this ethical litmus test. And that's the kind of actions that organisations need to be wary of. So, what are some of the things that actually lead to companies using ethical strategies and business behaviour? And again, we can use the banking example in Australia to illustrate. There can be faulty oversight and self-dealing. Here in Australia, some of our banks, the directors and the senior management were so wrapped up in doing their own little thing that they didn't really focus on paying attention to what was happening within their organisations. Pressure for short-term performance. If the senior executives of an organisation are rewarded purely on things such as driving up the value of the shares of the company, there's a strong possibility that they might do all sorts of things, not that are illegal, but that aren't morally right, to try and improve this short-term performance of the company. A weak or corrupt ethical environment. Again, if there's no leadership from the very top, from the directors of the organisation, then something can very quickly disintegrate into a weak or corrupt ethical environment. We talk about self-dealing and short-termism. They're two things that actually lead to ethical issues. Self-dealing tends to occur if managers take advantage of their position to further their own private interests rather than furthering the interests of the firm. So like where I said, if the CEO gets the bulk of his salary, instead of a salary, if the bulk of their remuneration is as a result of how high the share price goes at a particular date, they can then manage not for the long-term good of the company, but for the short-term increase in share price. So they could actually be stripping a lot of value or not of the firm, not investing for the future, because investing for the future might mean that at the moment the share price is a little bit lower than perhaps it should be. Short-termism is the tendencies for managers to focus excessively on short-term performance objectives at the expense of longer-term strategic objectives. So for example, if a CEO was going to invest a sizable chunk of money in some plant and equipment which will increase future manufacturing, that might have a bit of an impact at the current point in time, but it'll set the company up for the future. But they might say, oh, but if I do this, my personal salary isn't going to be as high this year, so I won't. And then they'll just move on, and the company in the long term won't be as steady, as profitable. It has negative implications for company performance in the longer run, and also the likelihood of ethical lapses. So we always really need to be careful that we are really looking for the long-term future. We are not looking to make the company the best possible company just for the next 6 months or 12 months. We've got to be looking longer term than that.